Cormaigad Can Corlia agus Tranoni New Turum Toka again Corlia Kurt Brehinus in Europa in New Gurchart and Brehinus in the ECG the Kurchi General to Modulin Kenu and Kes Kana Apple or Yatu agus Teskin Lake Gurinia and Keshaw agus and Chorus Kenya Satir Shaw Tomal Fadahon Grincha Damish to the Clue States in the Heron. Minister, the FDI sector is a vitally important part of our economy and it employs over 300,000 people. And for so many multinationals, Ireland is an attractive place to operate and to grow, thanks to our highly educated workforce. And it's important also to them and for us that our tax regime is stable and that it's respected. And there have been elements of our tax code that have not lived up to those standards in the past, whether it was the double Irish or the facilitation of stateless companies. These arrangements inflicted considerable reputational damage on the state and were rightly following pressure from Sinn Féin and others closed down. It is not in the interest of the state or our economy to have an unwelcome spotlight shone on our tax system, especially when such attention provides motivation for some to encroach on what should never be at stake, that is, our tax sovereignty. In 2016, the European Commission found that two tax rulings issued by the Revenue in 1991 and in 2007 to Apple had substantially and artificially lowered the tax paid by Apple since 1991. It declared that more than €14 billion in unpaid taxes and interest was owed by Apple to Ireland. The arrangement the Commission investigated was disclosed by Apple's own head of tax operations, Philip Bullock, in sworn testimony at the 2013 hearings of the US Senate Subcommittee on Investigations, where he said that the income earned by Apple subsidiaries in Ireland in question was subject to, in his own words, in accordance with an agreement that we have with Ireland, and he confirmed that that agreement was that there was a maximum of 2% fixed on the tax. This allowed a situation where Apple's Irish subsidiary recorded European profits of €16 billion in 2021 with only €50 million of tax paid here. The Irish government decided, wrongly in our view at the time, to join Apple in appealing the case to the General Court. But that case was won. I said in July 2020, when the government proclaimed victory, that this was not a cause for victory, but marked only half-time in the case. Minister, today the Advocate General of the European Court of Justice has given his opinion that the ECJ should set aside the judgment of the General Court and has proposed that the case should instead be referred back to the General Court for a new decision to be made. It should be noted that his opinion is non-binding, with the ECJ judgment due in the next several months. However, there is no doubt about it, today's opinion is a blow for Apple and indeed for the government who took the case. Worse still, it is a further embarrassment for the state, and again it shines a spotlight on our tax affairs and further strengthens the resolve of some within the Commission to encroach on something that was never at question in this case, and that is our tax sovereignty and the right to set our own corporate tax rate fairly and consistently. So, Minister, now we have it. On the day after the Finance Committee unanimously voted to apply a minimum effective tax rate on large multinationals, again an unwelcome spotlight has been shone on Ireland's tax regime and past practices. So can I ask you, do you not agree that today's opinion inflicts further reputational damage on the state and past tax arrangements that were in operation here that are no longer in operation? And what is the government's response in relation to today's opinion?
Deputy Doherty. Minister, please.
Thanks very much, Deputy Doherty. And as you know, a stable tax system has been absolutely essential in terms of the growth of our economy and the progress of Ireland over the last number of decades. And we have seen the benefits of that for our population and indeed the transformation of our economy. And it's something as a government that we take very seriously and want to make sure we maintain that. You're raising in particular a court judgment in relation to the Apple tax case here this morning, and that's a judgment this morning, Deputy Doherty, which has been delivered by the Advocate General, or it's an opinion delivered by the Advocate General this morning is not the judgment of the court itself. We expect that in the near future, probably in a few months' time. And as you will fully understand, Deputy Doherty, as the matter is still the subject of legal proceedings, it's not appropriate to comment on any element of the case. And I know, as a finance spokesperson, that's something that you will fully understand, given the fact that it's currently under subject to judicial proceedings. But looking to the backdrop of this, Deputy Doherty, as you know, in 2016, the European Commission issued a decision finding that Ireland provided state aid to Apple. Ireland challenged this finding to the General Court of the European Union at that point, and then in 2020 the General Court of the European Union issued its judgment, which annulled the Commission's state aid decision of 2016. The Commission appealed the judgment to the Court of Justice of the European Union, and on the 23rd of May this year, the Court of Justice heard that appeal. The Commission, Ireland, Luxembourg, Apple and the EFTA Surveillance Authority made interventions before that court. Following an oral hearing, then, the Advocate General's opinion was published on the 9th of November 2023. That opinion analyses the legal aspects, Deputy Doherty, of the case in detail, and separately from the deliberations of the court, it provides an opinion regarding the issue being heard. This opinion does not form part of the CJEU's judgment, but is considered by the court when arriving at its final judgment. So, following on now from the Advocate General's opinion, the Court of Justice's judgment will be pronounced in the open court, and the timing of the judgment is entirely at the discretion of the court itself. I note that the contents of the Advocate General's opinion, however, as I said, as the matter is under and subject to legal proceedings at the moment, it's not appropriate to comment any further. But again, going back to my point at the outset, Deputy Doherty, a stable tax environment and a business tax environment which is attractive to companies internationally and which is reputable and that companies and countries and investors can have confidence in, has been central to the progress and development of this country. Many different parts of it. No more, for example, than in our own county and our own constituency of Donegal, where in Letterkenny, for example, in a town with a population of 20,000 people, we have 4,000 IDA-based jobs in that town, very much key to the lifeblood of the country. We, as a government, take very seriously the tax regime we have in place. We have engaged in international level as well in terms of coming to international agreements in relation to how the corporation tax should be conducted internationally, and have been very much to the fore of that. That's something that we will continue to do. But in relation to this particular case, Deputy Doherty, because it's still the subject of ongoing judicial proceedings, we obviously, yourself and particularly the government, have to be very cognisant of a particular comment in relation to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, at the heart of this case are old tax rulings, some going back over 3 decades. They don't exist. The arrangements that were in place at those times don't exist anymore. We do have a stable tax environment, and indeed it'll become more fair as a result of the work we did in the Finance Committee by implementing Pillar 2 of the OECD BEPS process, which was agreed last night. And that will ensure that large multinationals pay an appropriate and higher level of tax on their profits, and that is welcome as part of a global agreement. We also acknowledge that many of the tax arrangements that were shone a negative spotlight on this state are no longer in existence. The Double Irish, for example, has been closed down, but it took many years for the government to move on that. Stateless companies, which is at the core of this here, again facilitated through our tax code and how it interacted with other jurisdictions, has been closed down, those loopholes. But the fact that these tax arrangements in question were allowed to operate by successive governments for too long is an issue. Government resisted to the closing them down for many years until succumbing from pressure from Sinn Féin and others. And regardless of what way the courts judge, the fact is an Irish subsidiary of Apple in 2011 recorded €16 billion profit and paid a 0.03% tax rate. So do you accept that today's opinion will shine an unwelcome spotlight on our former tax affairs of the state and further inflict reputational damage? And what's the government's strategy going forward? I'm not asking you, what is the government's strategy going forward now as a result of this opinion?
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Minister.
Well, our strategy generally, and again, I won't get involved in the particular opinion, Deputy Doherty. I know it's something that you opposed us defending and your party are defending as a state. But going forward in terms of maintaining a stable tax regime and business tax regime and personal tax regime in this country as well, our objective is to continue to work with international partners to have consistency across international borders in relation to how laws operate, and indeed to ensure that we are working with those. And by doing so and by engaging in that way, we give confidence, continued confidence to businesses from many parts of the world to actually continue to invest here and to stay here. I know in terms of corporation taxes in general, it was something your party had differing views on at different times in the past. Many pre-budgets in the past you had advocated for changes and increases in the overall corporation tax rate. And if we had followed your party's policy on corporation tax over the years, we wouldn't have the many companies, or we wouldn't have the very strong economy, international facing, with strong international investment here that we do have today. I know you've very significantly moderated your own views and your own party's policy in relation to that in the very recent past, and that's welcome. But we will work as a government. We will work as a government, Deputy, to continue to engage appropriately in relation to this particular judgment, and to particularly make sure we maintain a situation where there's confidence in terms of investment in Ireland and the tax situation in Ireland.
Leader of the Party, Deputy Ivana Bacik, please.
Minister, under a Fianna Fáil housing minister, a minister from your own party, homelessness has reached record levels in the lifetime of this government. And we warned last year that the failure to extend the ban on evictions would lead to a massive increase in the numbers of people without a home. And sadly, that has come to pass. The September homelessness figures were published a fortnight ago as the Dáil went on recess. Those figures showed that 12,827 people are now without a home in Ireland. We contrast that with the figures when your government came to power in July 2020, when there were 8,728 people registered as homeless. So, Minister, in the space of just over 3 years, you have managed to increase homelessness, shockingly, by over 4,000 women, men and children, a surge of almost 50%. So has the government become desensitised to the gravity of these enormous figures? Because behind every individual figure, there is an individual person, a woman, a man or a child, who has been left without a home. And this is a desperate reality. So, Minister, will you admit that your government's housing policy has failed? And you've been saying endlessly that you can't build houses overnight, and of course you can't. But across the board, your government's actions in the last 3 years have undermined your stated aims of keeping people in affordable and secure homes. You won't act to restrict no-fault evictions to keep people in their homes. You won't act to impose a use-it-or-lose-it obligation on developers who speculate on land. That's been delayed. And just this morning, it's become clear that you also will not face up to your responsibility to fund local authorities to bring vacant homes back into use, to provide social homes. In oral questions to the Housing Minister this morning, I raised a concerning situation brought to my attention by my Labour colleague, our Dublin City Councillor for the South West Inner City, Dara Moriarty, who has given me the minutes of a meeting of Dublin City Council which show that government funding for repairing and refurbishing empty council homes is being reduced further. And indeed, Olivia Kelly is reporting today in the Irish Times that council officials have confirmed department funding has changed. The budget is constantly coming down for refurbishment of what are known as voids, empty local authority homes. An official has estimated that as many as 220 fewer homes, 220, will be turned around as a result of a central government cut in next year's local authority budget for Dublin. So, Minister, make no mistake, that's 220 fewer families in the Dublin City Council area who will be housed in a refurbished home as a result of central government cuts. 220 every year for the next 3 years will mean 660 additional families left to languish on the housing list. And yet, we're getting replies from the Housing Minister and his colleagues that skirt around commenting on these figures. Minister Malcolm Noonan saying that funding would be available to councils. So are the government saying the Dublin City Council are wrong? Because we would welcome a clarification. Is this a national issue? So, Minister, has your government actually cut funding to councils to bring empty homes back into use? And can you guarantee that councils across the country, in Dublin but also across the country, will have enough money to deliver homes for people in 2024, people who desperately need them?
Minister, please.
Yeah, thanks, Deputy Bacik. Delivering more homes and preventing homelessness, Deputy Bacik, is the number one issue for this government. It was the number one issue why my party decided to go into government and sought the housing portfolio. And when you look at the investment that this government is putting in place and the three parties working together, it shows the commitment we have to ramping up in as fast as we possibly can the delivery of new homes and enabling people to have a home or a house that they can call their home, and particularly as well to enable people to be able to own that home. Every year under the Housing for All strategy, we are seeing significant progress in relation to the house builds in this country. It's not so long ago that I remember total house builds in the country was 7,000, 8,000 and 9,000 units per year. Last year that exceeded 30,000 new homes. And that included very significant investment, Deputy Bacic, in social homes directly built by the government or with the support of the government through social housing bodies. 10,000 social homes delivered last year, 7,400 of those social homes. And that's something we're going to continue to deliver, because that ultimately is the solution for the housing challenges that we have. We also have to make sure that in relation to properties that are there, and particularly for social properties whereby they become vacant or they become voided, that the support is in place to make sure they come back into circulation immediately. I know this morning you're raising particularly the issue in relation to Dublin City Council. And this year the Government and Minister for Housing, Darragh O'Brien, has allocated over €4.8 million to the City Council this year so that 445 homes can be remediated, and €870,000 has been allocated as well for planned maintenance. Also, at the moment, officials from the Department of Housing have been in contact with Dublin City Council in an effort to identify additional units and funding requirements, and every effort will be made to support these additional requests. So it is crucial that we make sure properties are brought into circulation. That's something the government is focusing on in terms of our social housing stock. And it's also, really importantly as well, Deputy Bacic, something we're focusing in relation to many of the vacant and derelict homes that are in private stock across the country. And that's why under Housing for All, we've introduced the vacant property grant of €50,000 where a property is vacant for more than a year, to enable it to come back into circulation. And it's also why we have introduced the derelict property grant, whereby there's a grant from the government through the local authorities of €70,000 to bring derelict properties back into circulation. And that also has been extended to ensure that it applies to all parts of the country, where it's a village or a town or a rural house that's been derelict or vacant, to bring them all back into circulation. So it's something that the government is working on every day, and ultimately, in terms of addressing homelessness, in terms of bringing down rents, the key objective here is to drive on as fast as we possibly can the delivery of new houses, and that is the number one objective for this government every day and every week and every month.
Deputy Bacic.
Minister, I note recent reports that you haven't ruled yourself out of the running as a candidate for the EU Commission, but I might say that I think it's more appropriate for your government to focus on matters closer to home. And with respect, Minister, you didn't answer my specific question about whether Dublin City Council funding for restoring voids had been cut or not. I do appreciate this is a bigger issue than social homes, because we know there are over 100,000 properties sitting empty, vacant, derelict across the country. It is a national scandal, a scourge. Next week, our colleagues in the Shannon Labour senators will be bringing a motion to address vacancy and dereliction, and we'll be addressing some of those other issues that you've raised. But this particular issue of sufficient funding for local authorities to tackle voids, to bring empty and derelict homes back into use, and to operate the vacant and derelict sites register. This is a critical issue, and it'll be raised in the Shannon next week as well. Because, Minister, it does appear to us as if your government is guilty of a dereliction of duty here. You're taking a hands-off approach, you're washing your hands at central government level, and you are placing the blame, the fault and the responsibility with local authorities, and yet not funding them adequately to be able to deliver the necessary refurbishments to bring vacant and derelict properties back into use, and to bring more people back into the homes they so desperately need.
Minister.
I don't agree with that, Deputy Bacic, in terms of the fact or your accusation there, but I would agree with you on the absolute importance of making sure that properties don't go void, that once a social property is vacated by an outgoing tenant or a family who moves on, that property is immediately brought back into circulation, and that the Department of Housing and the government, working with the local authority, make sure that we're providing the funding to ensure that that is providing a home to a family. That's something we're doing every single year. At national level this year, there's €31 million funding allocated specifically for this. I know this morning you're raising a specific issue in relation to Dublin City Council area, and I have outlined to you that the Department of Housing officials are in contact at the moment and currently with Dublin City Council in an effort to identify additional units that have funding requirements, and will be making every effort to support these additional requests as well. So it's an important issue on an ongoing basis, alongside the work we're doing, Deputy Bacic, in terms of trying to bring new properties into circulation, both on a social basis and on a private basis for families, making sure that every property we have in this country is being fully utilised.
Thank you very much. Deputy Cathal Berry on behalf of the Regional Group.
Thanks. Concorda, and good afternoon, Minister. Minister, I want to raise with you today the very concerning and serious developments during the week, whereby access to the Chinese market for Irish beef has been temporarily suspended. And I know the Minister will be fully aware this is the very, very last thing that Irish agriculture needs at this moment, particularly for circular farmers, and particularly after the year that's just been gone. We've had historically high input costs for feed, for fuel, for fertiliser. We've had reduced margins, reduced cap payments. We've had the disastrous nitrates directive. We've had awful weather, and now we have this as well, Minister. So this is tragedy heaped on tragedy, really, and just the blows just keep on coming. Just that said, Minister, I suppose we have to be grateful for small mercies as well, that it was an isolated case, nowhere near the feed or the food chain, which is good. That it was an atypical case, most likely. So most likely it was spontaneous in origin rather than transmitted. And perhaps most reassuring of all, it was detected by Irish authorities, and it was communicated very transparently by Irish authorities across the world. And I think we've a lot of generations of Irish farmers to be thankful for, because I think the reputation of Irish beef from a grassland and from a quality and from a safety point of view has come to a rescue here. I recognise that China, there's an automatic suspension once the trigger is kicked off and that a case is detected. But I very much welcome the fact that the other 70 countries that we export beef to haven't responded at all. And I think that's a testament to the quality of Irish beef and to our farmers down through the years. Just in the time you have available this morning, Minister, I know there's a lot of worry out there among the agricultural community, even though it's only a 16 million industry for China this year so far. But could you use your time, first of all, to give us some background in relation to the case? And secondly, is there any indication of how long will it take before we can lift this ban, this temporary suspension, and restore access? So are we talking days, are we talking weeks, are we talking months or longer? And what level of engagement has there been between your officials and their counterparts in China, or through the Chinese embassy, for instance? And perhaps most importantly, Minister, the Taoiseach is in China at the moment. Could you indicate, has he spoken to his counterparts over there about this issue? And if not, is it something he would consider before he returns to this country? Thank you very much, Minister.
Thanks very much, Deputy Berry, for raising this important issue this morning. And as you're requesting, I want to first of all reassure everyone of the absolute safety of our beef and of the fact that there is no safety issue in relation to this atypical case of BSE. It's very different from a classical BSE, which was an issue 10, 20 years ago and was related to feed. It is something that happens sporadically and randomly in bovines, and it always will. One in every number of million, every so often. We had a similar atypical case in 2020 and a similar case as well in 2017. And we will have similar atypical cases because we have 7 or 8 million cattle in this country in the future as well. What's critical is that we have the best testing system anywhere in the world in relation to this, and that's why we catch and capture any such case like this, and not only in relation to BSE but in relation to all other types of food safety as well. And that system will continue in place. It's recognised by the World Animal Health Organization in terms of its security, and also in terms of the fact that we have the best possible rating in relation to BSE risk. It's at the lowest category possible, negligible, under the World Animal Health Organization rating. And that's recognised, therefore, by all of our markets. We export to 70 markets across the world, one of those being China. But China is the only of those 70 markets that we export to that have a specific clause in the export protocol that requires that any time there's an atypical case that exports must be suspended, voluntarily suspended as soon as that happens, and an epidemiological report submitted to the Chinese authorities. This is a process we've gone through over the last couple of years already. We secured access to China for the first time in 2018. In 2019, we were building up, and our companies were working hard there and building up customers. But then the atypical case in 2020 led to a suspension of the Chinese market. And over 2021 and 2022, we worked through with the Chinese authorities to get our market reopened. That was reopened back in January. So it's a disappointment that we've had a case now again. But I'm hopeful, and as the point you make yourself, Deputy Berry, I'm hopeful that given the fact we've gone through this process very recently with the Chinese authorities and that they have verified and signed off the absolutely strong controls we have in place, that we will be able to more promptly gain market access again. But that's ultimately a matter for the Chinese authorities to decide upon. The Taoiseach is there this week and will be raising this matter as part of his visit. I did a trade visit to China myself earlier on this year as well. And the access to markets is massively important. I was in South Korea last week seeking to progress access to the South Korean market. My colleague, Minister of State Martin Hayden, is in Malaysia and the Philippines this week as well, looking to build in the markets we have there, because international markets are massively important to family farm income in this country, and making sure we have as many as possible
Thank you,
open.
Minister.
And we hope to see the Chinese one reopen in the best time frame possible now.
Deputy Berry.
Minister, I guess I just have one other concern. So first of all, I echo your sentiments in relation to the credibility and the robustness of our surveillance system. I think that's something to be applauded, and that's what we're leaning on from a reputational point of view at the moment. Just my other concern, Minister, is that the meat factories out there, if they seek to take full advantage of this development and lower the prices of carcasses even more as a result of this, are there any safeguards out there to prevent this from happening? And can the Minister give the House any reassurance that this won't be allowed to happen in his watch? So just the meat prices at the factory, Minister, is there anything we can do to make sure they don't take full advantage of this development? Thank you very much.
So it's an important market for us to develop and to build on, and our meat companies actually were doing really strong work there in terms of building up customers, and it has a lot of potential for the future, being a market of 1.4 billion people in China and growing in terms of its GDP as well and economic well-being. But currently, Deputy Berry, it's a small proportion of our overall beef exports. It amounted so far this year to €16 million worth in exports. That's out of a total exports we'll have this year of €2.5 billion. So it's just under 0.5% and of our overall beef exports. And there's very good demand at the moment from many other markets we have for our beef. So I don't have any worries in relation to it impacting on our current beef price because there is good demand, and 69 other markets, which make up 99.5% of our total volume. So that's important. Of course, the step I've taken as Minister, which has been unprecedented before in terms of the state, is actually I've introduced this year a new office, Food Regulator Office as well, specifically for the purpose of bringing more transparency to the food supply chain. So that relationship between farmer, primary producer, processors and retailers, that we have an office in place, statutory office, shining a light on that to make sure farm farmers are getting fair play. But we all have to work together to maximise the value of our beef. We all have to work together to get re-entry again and to build that market so it can deliver for family farms in the future. Thanks, Deputy Berry.
Deputy Matthew McGrath on behalf of the Rural Independent Group.
Margaret Cloncola. Minister, I'm deeply concerned about the fraudulent activities by vulture funds that are influencing our course and the land registry in Ireland. Over the past few weeks, I shared crucial details with all TDs, including yourself, Minister, outlining misconduct in the banking system. This misconduct has significantly impacted on our economy and the lives of our many homeowners, family farms and these small businesses. The document provided by Mr. Ed Horan, Master of the High Court for many decades actually, have my full support. These documents aim to provide the rights of homeowners, farmers and businesses owners who are suffering due to an unfair system that allows stacked against them completely. Deceiving the courts and homeowners is a very serious matter, Minister. I hope you agree. Inviting of vulture funds here was bad enough, but to allow them to have this carry on going on is absolutely reprehensible and disgraceful. Fine Gael, now Fianna Fáil and the Greens party allowed the banks to sell off loans without any requirement to update land registry records. This has caused widespread confusion, malpractice and blatant deception, which is causing thousands of families, family farms and homes lose their properties in this country. The courts are complying with a new EU repossession directive meant to protect the interests of those struggling with mortgage arrears. The reason for this is the fact that your government has failed to transpose this EU directive. Why has it not been transposed? Are the banking lobby that strong and the vulture lobby? The courts' non-compliance and government's inaction are very despicable, as I said, and deeply unfair. It gives distressed borrowers no protection whatever, while it gives a free hand and a massive advantage to the vulture funds. Currently in our country, in Ireland, there is no organisation protecting borrowers, unlike what's available for landlords and tenants under the RTB. Distressed homeowners are facing expensive court procedures, which many cannot afford, and totally unfair then with the might of the banks and the vultures. They can roll out the best of law firms. The EU directive suggests a mediation process that would be fairer to people dealing with the increase at the mortgage arrears. It's imperative that the government enacts this directive into law, preventing vulture funds from continuing their unfair and disgraceful practices. The government must act swiftly to halt the vulture funds from selling more people's homes. Judges have to be upskilled and updated on the law that's there since 2019 in Europe. And why aren't we paying heed to that? I mean, we need, I've often said this, we need kind of an upskilling and re-educating of our judiciary every so often, because laws change. It's very hard to keep up with them. Currently, the laws are not being enforced in our courts. This cannot be allowed to go on, Minister. The lawyers representing the vulture funds are providing false evidence in repossession cases.
Thank you, Deputy.
Such significant harm to people and their homes, while the government remains silent. This cannot be allowed to continue either.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Minister, please.
Thanks for raising this, Deputy McGrath. So, as you know, as well as myself and everyone in the House here, we've come through a decade to 15 years. This was quite traumatic in terms of the people's personal finances, and also the situation many people across this country, in terms of their personal lives or their business lives, found themselves in as a result of mortgages and debts that they would have accumulated in good faith, but which, as a result of the economy and the financial crash in 07-08, found themselves in very precarious situations. And many people have the scars on their back that reflect that period as well. From a government point of view, Deputy McGrath, something that we engage with the financial authorities on, and the Central Bank have a strong role in relation to as well. And there's been significant changes in the law in recent years in relation to providing oversight and protections for those that have debts, those that have mortgages, or those that have business debts as well, in terms of engaging in depth and trying to give the capacity and opportunity and find pathways for people to come through and to maintain their businesses, and particularly to maintain their homes. It's really important that's the case. It is overseen, and those laws that are in place then are overseen by our judicial system. And it's important that people have fair play. Thankfully, we've seen, as a result of the good management of the economy and getting into a good position in relation to employment and good fiscal management at government level, the economy recover, and those issues help to become resolved and people get into a better situation. But it is important we keep a close eye on this, Deputy McGrath. It is important people get fair play in relation to their engagement with financial institutions, and in relation to the oversight bodies that we have in place and the laws and regulations we have in place, and which have been significantly adjusted from what they were 10 plus years ago, that they do serve the public well, while making sure we have a fair system in terms of financial engagements and contracts as well. Thanks.
Since I issued this statement 2 weeks ago, my office and myself are inundated with families from all over the 26 counties. And you all know about these. But why aren't you dealing with them? It's shocking that we can transpose any kind of directive that comes from Europe when it comes to environment or as anti-farmer. But this is a EU directive that hasn't been transposed, and it must be transposed. It's shameful that you'd stand up and give me those answers here today, because you're not dealing with it. 10 years on, the amount of lives that have been lost, the amount of suicides, the amount of marriage breakups, the amount of mental health issues, and the amount of repossessions and outright blackguarding of families, that we fought in this country to get our freedom, and to allow the vultures carry on like this, and the big banking houses, which your government softly won't deal with. It's just impossible that you won't give a date here that you would immediate transposition of this EU directive into Irish law. Why? Who are you protecting? I won't say who you're loyal to. You know what I've got me before. Who are you protecting? You're not loyal to the people, Nadine and Nairn, that you elected you in here today. So I'm pleading with the Minister of Justice and the Minister of Finance to act here, to stop this sabotaging and plundering. It's worse than they did in Cromwell's time, our families and our people, our businesses and their homes and everything else, to make money from the stock exchange in New York. And I fully support Ed Honan in his travels to New York to expose this carry-on at the stock exchange there. This must be stopped. It's outright criminal.
Minister, please.
I'll get you an up-to-date note, Deputy McGrath, in relation to the specific issue you raised in relation to the transposition of that directive. But listen, what I would say overall, and as I mentioned previously, the objective of the government is to work to provide strong support to those who find themselves in financial arrangements, either in relation to a mortgage for a property or businesses likewise. And there's strong provisions now and relevant statutory consumer protection codes in place, including the Consumer Protection Code and the Code of Conduct on Mortgage Arrears as well. It is something at government level that Minister for Finance Michael McGrath continues to monitor. And importantly so. But the landscape and the protections have changed significantly, and it's something we continue to look at in government. And it is about protecting the people in every way we can. That means giving people protection in relation to the contracts they enter. It also means that there's a business environment that there's confidence around and that there's security around as well. And that's something that we as a government want to make sure we maintain. Thank you, Deputy McGrath.
Questions. We move to questions.